EWA 517, do you want to report a UFO? Over.
Negative. We don't want to report.
Look, it wasn't my worst Wednesday night.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of Anomaly Now. I'm your host, Miles Lewis, transmitting to you straight out of Austin, Texas. This is the weekly, well, it's been a few weeks. This is actually Thursday, May 7th, 2026, and I haven't done this show in a few weeks now. Life is way too busy. Unfortunately, I haven't had the time or frame of mind to do this weekly news show. Most of what I'm going to cover today, again, this is Thursday, May 7th, 2026. Usually drop these on a Wednesday, recorded either that day or the day before. Again, this is all in service of the Anomaly Archives, a 501c3 nonprofit, aka the Scientific Anomaly Institute. You can find out more about us over at anomalyarchives.org. And this is the weekly news and media roundup where I try to highlight things that I think you'll find interesting that are across the anomalies spectrum. Of course, I tend to focus on the things that interest me the most, which are UFOs, parapsychology, cryptozoology, and just fringe science and a little bit of conspiracy parapolitics, but always with hopefully a rational approach, an agnostic approach, or multidisciplinary approach. I did want to thank the folks who put on the Austin Archives Bazaar that happens every 2 years. You can find out more about that at austinarchivesbazaar.org. That's B-A-Z-A-R-R. Excuse me. B-A-Z-A-A-R. Right on. Anyway, they put on a great bazaar this year. And as in some of previous years, it was held at Sigerund Hall. That's adjacent to ye old Schultz's Beer Garden in downtown Austin. It was so wonderful, so fantastic. We were so well received. We always have such a great time there. I was tabling with one of our board members. Thank you, John. Really appreciate your help. And it was amazing. There were so many people at this archives event. And again, this isn't a paranormal or UFO oriented event. It's an archives event highlighting the many amazing archives across this massive state that is Texas. And there's always just great people. There's so many good people that are involved in libraries and archives. And so many of them are unsung heroes. And thank you to all the volunteers that helped put on the Austin Archives Bazaar. It was really great. We were just thronged with people. It was fantastic. My board member, John, and I were just double teaming it. There was a row of people and we're each talking to people in front of the table. And there was another row behind of people trying to look over the shoulders and trying to get a glimpse of what we were all about. And we got a lot of mail newsletter signups, and it was so much fun. Really great. Thank you all that put that together. And it happens every 2 years. So hopefully be there at the next one. All right, moving right along. As usual, you can go to anomalyarchives.org, find out more about us. You can also go to our Flipboard. That's flipboard.com/@anomaly archives and click through to the actual Flipboardmagazine feed. And there are a ton of news articles there. And as usual, we never get to all of them, but there are so many headlines constantly happening. And this is as much a way for me to have a place to flip them over so that I can go back and read them, because there's just not enough time in the day to read all this stuff or to watch it or to listen or to process it. And yeah, like Terrence McKenna said, things are just getting weirder and weirder and weirder. You can also go to our patreon.com page. That's patreon.com/anomalyarchives. Surprise, surprise. And you can sign up for free. We try to make as much material available for free as possible, but if you donate at a certain level or higher, at the Anomaly Academy Cadet tier or higher, you get access to participate in the live monthly online lecture series. And those, of course, then eventually get made public to a wider audience. Everybody can watch them for free. But to start, we really need your support. We are still struggling to find affordable rental space in Austin so that we can open up publicly again. And we hope that you'll join us in trying to make that happen. Okay. Well, let's see what else is going on. Yeah. What was the heck? Well, yes. Okay. I just thanked the Archives Bazaar. So what's really on my mind? So again, these are things that were really on my mind over the last 3 weeks. 3 weeks ago, these are mainly what I was going to highlight then. So they're still on my mind, and that's going to be pathos on parade, ufology style. And I chuckle, but none of this is funny. It is all a testament to how messed up humanity is and how each niche community has its share of mental health issues and just bad behavior, especially misogyny. So, yeah, what was it? Back on April 27th, I saw from Hidden Experience podcast host, writer, experiencer Mike Cleland over at his Patreon posted, "I've removed episode 25 from this platform. I just deleted the interview with J. Christopher King from the site. It was posted in December of last year. Below is a statement from Daniel Noah, one of the directors of SpectreVision. He posted this on Twitter X moments ago, and I was a little shocked. I've not actually met J. Christopher King. I first saw him in person at the 2022 grand opening of the Rice University Archives of the Impossible. He, of course, is well known as the founder of one of the largest, I'm not sure, but one of the more significant, perhaps, UFO experiencer support groups and forums that I thought was really pretty respected. And of course, he had become the creative partner with Kelly Chase after she transitioned from her UFO Rabbit Hole podcast to the Cosmosis documentary project, and then her new Inquiry podcast. Yeah, they were creative partners on Cosmosis, which I still highly recommend as a documentary. But yes, like so many things, it may become hard to find because of this cancellation due to the alleged misogynistic bad behavior of J. Christopher King. For those who aren't familiar, SpectreVision, that's SPECTRE Vision, SpectraVision Radio, is this podcast network that's the partnership of Daniel Noah and Elijah Wood. That's right, actor Elijah Wood and Daniel Noah have been gobbling up a lot of paranormal and UFO-oriented podcast content creation, and they've got their SpectreVision and Imprimatur on so many programs now. That's just kind of interesting as an aside. Of course, the announcement that Mike Cleland made on his Patreon relates to this SpectreVision Radio at Twitter and Instagram, basically saying concerning allegations from multiple individuals have been made against J. Christopher King, former co-host of the Cosmosis podcast and co-founder of the Experiencer Group. While it is not our place to adjudicate these claims, we take them very seriously. Effective immediately, SpectreVision Radio has suspended its relationship with Jay, and all content he produced or appeared in has been removed from the network across all platforms pending further developments. Everyone in the Experiencer community deserves a safe and supportive environment to connect with others without fear. We are exploring steps to ensure there is support for anyone speaking out against predatory or exploitative behavior. We must not stay silent. And over at Kelly Chase's Inquiry with Kelly Chase Substack, addressing the allegations against my former creative partner, J. Christopher King. This was posted on April 30th. She writes, I recently received an email from an individual who said they wanted to share a concerning series of online interactions they had with my former creative partner, J. Christopher King. This person shared that they are an experiencer who started a correspondence with Jay on Instagram after seeing him on Cosmosis. They alleged that in the course of this conversation, where they also shared vulnerable details of their history, Jay crossed sexual boundaries and sent an explicit photo. Screenshots were shared with me in support of these claims. They said they were reaching out because they were concerned by the brazenness of this behavior, particularly given that Jay is a public figure and given his role working with vulnerable people in the experiencer group. They were concerned that others might be at risk. She went on to say, Kelly Chase goes on to say, I initially didn't believe it. Jay is someone I've worked with very closely over the last 3 years. He's been my business partner and my closest friend. We have spoken extensively about his work as the director for the experiencer group and had many conversations, often initiated by him, about how vulnerable people can be when processing anomalous experiences and how important it is to maintain clear boundaries and ethical standards. It is only because we've had these conversations at length that I was ever comfortable recommending that people join the experiencer group. I did not think it was possible that the person I knew could have done something like this, but as someone who has been the victim of sexual assault that went unpunished, and as a woman in this community who has publicly endorsed Jay as someone safe, this was not something I could ignore. From the moment I first allowed for the possibility that this might be true to the time I was on the phone with a woman sharing another deeply distressing account involving Jay was just a few hours. I have since heard from multiple women who have described concerning behavior. As she said, these stories are not mine to tell. This is so concerning. And, again, Mike Cleland over at that Hidden Experience podcast on Patreon ended his post by saying, I've spoken with a few people I trust, and it's bad. This isn't a forum for that kind of news. Removing that episode is the right thing to do. I've worked hard to share conversations of value, and I want this podcast to express the highest integrity. Yes. And of course, over at Kelly Chase's Inquiry with Kelly Chase YouTube channel, she did a video version of that bit. You can go and listen to her read that statement I was just reading from. Yeah, this is just terrible. And it's so frustrating that this kind of thing is going on. I mean, how obvious is it to most humans that that kind of behavior is just wrong? And there's already just so much terribleness, human to human, in this world, and we just don't need. All right. Well, going back over to the sad listings of Pathos on Parade, we also have news of the death of David Wilcock. Is that a misspelling in that? Yep, that is. So I've never been a follower of David Wilcock. From the moment I heard that he thought he was the reincarnation of Edgar Casey, to his then quick acceleration into paranoid conspiracy mongering a la claims of a new world order and the goals of one world government, all things that, can be discussed rationally, can be talked about. I'm not saying there aren't powers and principalities that are interested in such control of the world, but when it becomes clear that people are believing some of the wildest conspiracy beliefs without any evidence beyond their intuition or guilt by association type mentalities, and believing some of the least believable conspiracy theories out there, it becomes problematic. And so I've really not paid much attention. And I did not realize the extent of how huge he'd become, even though I guess I knew a little bit about that. Over at Mashable.com, I guess is their India edition. David Wilcock's death, community claim. His biographer, Winfrey, died 2 days before UFO authors alleged suicide. Something is seriously up. I was really not aware, again, of this book either, but I've probably come across it years ago. The Reincarnation of Edgar Casey, Interdimensional Communication and Global Transformation by Winfrey with David Wilcock. I suspect that if this does appear to be true, that his biographer died a few days before David Wilcock took his own life. And yes, of course, there is speculation, as there always is immediately, that there was foul play involved and that he either was, suicided, as in the powers that be faked his death or killed him and made it look like a suicide, or as others might suggest, that he was driven to suicide. It's my understanding that he was suffering for many, many years. His family has since come out and made public their understanding of his long-term mental health problems throughout his life. The conservative and vitriolic skeptic Jason Colavito at his blog, jasoncolavito.com, posted about this. And while I don't necessarily endorse Colavito's general demeanor, I think he provides some important facts here that I was not aware of. He writes, reports David Wilcock, former star of Ancient Aliens, dead at 53. And basically, you can listen to the 911 tapes of the police officers. It all seems to be pretty straightforward that there was wellness check called when it became clear that Wilcock was wandering around outside his home with a gun and threatening to kill himself and making statements about his financial situation, etc. According to a statement from the Boulder County Sheriff's Office, a man in Nederland, Colorado, ended his own life following a mental health crisis. Police encountered a man with a weapon who used it on himself. Yeah. In a live stream 2 days earlier, Wilcock said he was thankful to still be alive because of the rash of allegedly suspicious disappearances. Quote unquote, frankly, people are disappearing. Scientists are going missing, he said. It's a little bit scary, unquote. Wilcock told viewers he had had a rough week. Colavito goes on to say, Wilcock had long experienced mental health issues dating back to his adolescence, writing about them in his 2016 autobiography, The Ascension Masters, where he self-disclosed a series of mental illnesses, including depression and hallucinations, confessed to years of drug abuse, and wrote about his delusional belief that science fiction television shows communicated secret messages to him and that space aliens damaged the plumbing in his house in order to threaten him into silence. He believed his TV and his VCR spoke to him through high-pitched squeals. Wilcock also claimed that he had suffered repeated abuse and trauma beginning in childhood. Wilcock provided a full list of his self-disclosed conditions in The Ascension Mysteries. And by all accounts, it appears that whereas he had likely been making a lot of money, it's not sure, that apparently Wilcock was making a lot of money for a time, which is how he afforded buying this piece of property, and had a tremendous amount of followers. It appears that had changed significantly over the last few years, and his political views had, I don't know if they'd shifted so much, but they became much more apparent that he was supporting QAnon conspiracy theories and certain administrations that have promulgated those. But it is sad when someone takes their own life. And as always needs to be said, if you or someone is experiencing suicidal ideation, please do use the resources that are available out there. Call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. That's quick dial 988 for Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Yeah, it's just a waste. So bad. Okay, let's take a brief. This is Anomaly Now for Thursday, May 7th, 2026. And yeah, while I was at the Austin Archives Bazaar, the things that, of course, came up, people wanted to know about was the missing or murdered UFO high-tech murder mystery. Yes. So I'm going to include a link in the show notes for this episode to a page that I've created, Missing or Murdered Myths, Deathless or Nothing New, and are familiar to those who've researched UFOs, various New Age, alternative health, and parapolitical milieus. Note, inclusion does not equal endorsement. Myth is not meant to dismiss the tragedy for family and friends of missing or murdered individuals, nor to brush off the fact that people are sometimes killed or driven to suicide by others. That's where you'll find the links to some of the things that I'm going to point you to today on this episode. And those really do range across the board. Over at the Patreon, there's a premium episode for subscribers to the QAA podcast. That's the QAnon Anonymous podcast, the independent non-QAnon endorsing, the actual anti-QAnon conspiracy theory podcast that I highly recommend if you can stand their laughter. But they did a decent episode, The Case of the Vanished Scientist, featuring Mike Rothschild, premium episode 334. And Mike Rothschild has also penned this article over at talkingpointsmemo.com, What's Really Underpinning the Missing Scientist Conspiracy Theory. And this was published on April 27th, and you can go check that out there. That is not behind a paywall, whereas the QAA podcast that I mentioned is. UFO journalist and writer Billy Cox over at his Life in Jonestown Substack has the article about those dead and missing, more conspiracy grist and why not, where he, like I and others, point out the fact that this is nothing new. This is murdered and missing scientists in the UFO community is an old trope, an old myth, an old concept that's come up time and time and time again. And we were just seeing the latest version of it. You can go over to lifeinjonestown.substack.com and read Billy Cox's, as always, pretty funny writing about it. And of course, one of the news outlets that's really been pushing this is, of course, the News Nation channel, which the only reason I ever became aware of them was because of them covering the UFO UAP beat and the David Grush whistleblowing revelations, allegations. And sure enough, over at newsnationnow.com, promised UFO info release, not a nothing burger, ex-defense official. That ex-defense official is Michael Ramsey and also former Pentagon official Christopher Mellon. The most interesting thing here, though, is that Christopher Mellon is saying, missing scientists, no wide conspiracy. On another topic, Mellon was asked about speculation surrounding a group of at least a dozen U.S. researchers or insiders with ties to the aerospace or defense sectors who have died or gone missing in recent months. The former Pentagon official said he does not buy into a broad conspiracy theory, but added there is a subset that is certainly worth investigating, quote unquote. I agree. In particular, he noted the 2024 death of former Air Force intelligence officer Matthew Sullivan, who was slated to talk with lawmakers about UAP before he was found dead. I believe the allegation is that he took his own life. Again, here we have possible actual suicide that then gets transformed into, was he suicided? Was he pushed this? Or was he murdered and it made it look like us? I do agree that there is, quote unquote, a subset that is certainly worth investigating, unquote. Whereas it really seems to me that people are just grasping at straws and trying to link a bunch of different, yes, often untoward, odd deaths with the idea of some kind of international corporate espionage and or trying to cover up some kind of military industrial complex technology insiders, which I do not think is an unrealistic possibility. Meanwhile, I haven't actually heard this, but it's my understanding that Lou Elizondo weighs in on missing scientist cases, and I believe is expressing his concern that there is something really sinister going on here. Yeah, let's see. What does it say? Elizondo believes rushing to a binary conclusion is unwise at this juncture. Okay, I would quote, we have to give the FBI enough time for them to do their due diligence. I don't want to jump to any conclusions here. I think it's very important that we allow the investigation to continue and let those results be provided to the president, the National Security Council, and to Congress and the American people, Elizondo said. Elizondo is not concerned, quote unquote, Men in Black will attempt to hunt him down despite his whistleblowing. Quote, I think that's a bit cliche, but the reality is that, yes, some individuals I personally know who are considered whistleblowers have been intimidated. David Grush, for one. They've tried to intimidate me. We've had threats against us. We've had drones and surveillance, he said. And I might add, he was just involved in this motorcycle crash that nearly killed him, apparently, allegedly. That happened right around the time this was all ramping up. Now, I know others that have suggested that if he was driving home from work at the bar that I believe he's co-owner of, maybe there was something else at play in his car, his motorcycle wreck. Whatever the case, of course, we wish him a speedy recovery. But yes, that too could easily get thrown into the mix as, maybe there's something more there. Maybe he's just not willing to talk about it. Hard to say. Meanwhile, over at the same newsnationnow.com, Missing Scientists, a timeline of cases. You can see all about the people that they think are involved here. And I think I mentioned elsewhere in a recent interview that we definitely seen a spike in web traffic to the Anomaly Archives website. And I suspected, and it seemed to prove true, that a lot of those visitors were looking at our page about Amy Eskridge, who has been added to the list. And again, she's considered to be a suicide in Huntsville, Alabama back in June of 2022, but people feel like she was possibly pushed into it. She claimed that she was being harassed by electromagnetic non-lethal weaponry and other forms of harassment. And anyway, there's just this long, long list. And again, some of these people just don't really strike me. First of all, some of these aren't scientists. Some of these likely wouldn't have had access to any information worth abducting and interrogating them over or murdering them over. But again, I think statistically speaking, the vast majority of these cases aren't actually easily lumped in together, though each one of them is very odd. But again, this kind of speculation has happened a lot. Some other news outlets that you might want to listen to if you want to hear more about these subjects, especially if you want a good skeptical balance perspective, I would recommend I would recognize the work of and recommend the work of Micah Hanks. His Middle Theory podcast covered this on the 4/24/2026 episode, The Grand Dark Conspiracy, which is specifically about this issue. He had previously covered it on his Micah Hanks show on April 20th, The Missing Scientist, Birth of a UFO Conspiracy Theory. Those are both freely available. But it's really gotten widespread attention over at theguardian.com. Conspiracy theory over UFOs and missing scientists spreads from Webb to White House. And of course, the president was asked about this and he spoke about it, saying that he had just attended a meeting about it. It's unclear whether that was true or not, but definitely the press secretary and others in the administration have been asked about it and have spoken about it and say that it is under investigation. Who knows where that will lead? The subtitle to the Guardian article, Claim of Nefarious Plot Draws Attention of Lawmakers and President, but are disappearances and deaths really linked? That implies a skeptical approach. Meanwhile, over at Mick West, Arch Skeptics Substack, the UAP body count doesn't add up. A preview of research I'm doing for a Skeptical Inquirer piece. This was from April 16th. Of course, so much has happened since then. He's just, in this article, covering the first 10 people that range from Michael D. Hicks, Frank W. Maywald, Anthony Chavez, Monica Reza, Melissa Casillas, Stephen Garcia, Nuno Laureiro, Carl Grillmayer, William Neil McCasland, of course, the one that really kicked all this off, and Jason Thomas. Yeah. Of course, there are a lot of other takes out there that are much less skeptical. But again, this is nothing new. And I was immediately reminded of the work of friend and journalist, paranormal Fortean journalist, Nick Redfern. Over at his still online blog, nickredfernfortean.blogspot.com. If you do a search for mystery deaths, you can find a ton of articles that he's written and blog posts that he's written about this. Of course, sadly, Nick has withdrawn from the public and this community of discourse over and has returned to his home over in England. But back in 2015, he had posted Mystery Deaths, Microbiology and Viruses, and also talked about the release of his book, Close Encounters of the Fatal Kind, Suspicious Deaths, Mysterious Murders, and Bizarre Disappearances in UFO History. And there's a number of other articles that feature this issue of mysterious deaths. But what I also recalled was he wrote so many articles for mysteriousuniverse.org, which are no longer publicly available, but thank you, archive.org, the Wayback Machine over at the Internet Archive. We have from July of 2013, a book that needs to be written. On more than a few occasions, I get asked if there is any book I wish I had written or that I have thought about writing but never actually got around to. Well, as for the former, there are plenty. As for books that I have considered penning, one concerns a strange series of deaths that pretty much dawned as the 21st century began. I chose not to write it because of time constraints more than anything else. But that doesn't mean it's not a story worth chronicling in book-length form. It certainly is. So maybe after reading this, you'll be the one to take up the challenge. And yeah, so this is where he starts talking about the deaths of microbiologists. He says, since 2001, numerous individuals working within the elite field of microbiology, which is defined as the study of organisms that are too small to be seen with the naked eye, such as bacteria and viruses, have died under circumstances that many within the media, scientific circles, the general public, and the field of conspiracy-themed research have come to view as highly suspicious in nature. So that's one article he wrote back in 2013. Another one for Mysterious Universe in June of 2014, When UFOs Become Deadly. On Monday of this week, I had copies arrive of what is probably the most controversial book I've written so far, Close Encounters of the Fatal Kind, which is officially published on June 23rd, although a number of people have contacted me to say they already have copies. Basically, the book is a study of the many and varied suspicious deaths in the field of ufology spanning 1946 to pretty much the present day, 2014. And yeah, these are some of the older cases. But then, as he says, he moves into what is often referred to as the Star Wars SDI mystery deaths. Moving on from the early part of the 1980s to the 1990s, dozens of scientists working for GEC Marconi in the United Kingdom died under very dubious circumstances. Many were linked to President Ronald Reagan's Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, which was known far more famously by its nickname Star Wars. That SDI was allegedly to have been created to deal with a possible attack by hostile aliens led to an astonishing hypothesis. The Marconi scientists were murdered by extraterrestrials utilizing advanced mind control technology to prevent the SDI project from coming to fruition. Now, that's, again, Nick, forgot to finish the shared view. Sorry, folks. Yeah. When UFOs Become Deadly, June 2014, over at mysteriousuniverse.org via the Wayback Machine. But yeah, Nick Redfern wrote so many books on so many topics. And he, people would try to say, why do you believe this? And it's often the case that he's not saying he believes this. He's just, as a good journalist does, exploring people's beliefs about the information and reporting the information and reporting on people's beliefs. Another one that he wrote in December 2016, Mysterious Deaths in the Holistic. One of the more intriguing and disturbing issues of the last couple of years is the wave of deaths of doctors in the holistic community. Weird clusters like this happen now and again. There was, for example, a wave of odd deaths in the UK that involved dozens of people linked to Marconi. Something of a similar nature began at the start of the 21st century, again, across the planet. This time, it was microbiologists who were dropping like flies. On July 29, 2015, Health Impact News ran an article titled, "Is the U.S. Medical Mafia Murdering Alternative Health Doctors Who Have Real Cures Not Approved by the FDA?" It stated, quote, on June 19th, 2015, Dr. Jeffrey Bradstreet reportedly shot himself in the chest after his offices were raided by the U.S. FDA agents and state of Georgia law enforcement. 3 days before his death, agents exercised a search warrant to gather information about the use of GCMAF with autistic patients. His clinic, Human GCMAF, holds great promise in the treatment of various illnesses, including cancer, autism, chronic fatigue, and possibly Parkinson's. Since 1990, 59 research papers have been published on GCMAF, 20 of these pertaining to the treatment of cancer. And he goes on, and there's more there. I recall all of these things from back in the day. But, some other things that it's worth noting, in terms of talking about the missing or murdered mythos, are the connection to science fiction and other previous deaths that it reminds me of. There are 3 Texas-related UFO researchers who all died in some thought of a mysterious circumstance. Ron Johnson, Carla Turner, and Constance Clear. Now, in each of these cases, the Occam's razor, suggests that it's just something simple. But Gerald Ron Johnson was a very skeptical Austin MUFON member who was very active in our group back in the day. And he would often come to meetings of Austin MUFON to express a skeptical viewpoint, to debunk what he felt were pseudoscientific approaches to these subjects. And I recall, you may recall the mass UFO sightings from Mexico City that coincided with I think it was total eclipse, maybe solar eclipse. I forget now. But there was a documentary called Messengers of Destiny. And one of the things that was chronicled in that documentary were these mass sightings all across Mexico of looked like a stationary, silvery, disc-shaped object up in the sky. Well, Ron Johnson, we were going to show this at one of the monthly meetings of the Austin MUFON group here. This was back in the 90s, I think. And he wasn't going to be able to attend. He had a family obligation, but he felt so compelled to balance this documentary with some rationality that he did show up just briefly enough to show people how you could easily duplicate what's seen in the documentary by going outside as he had done that day and use a then common video camera to record Venus up in the daylight sky. And one of the effects of these old types of cameras is a point of light will generate a black pixelation under the pixels of the light object. And thus, a probably spherical shape will take on the appearance of a squished kind of saucer light with, a shiny top and a shadowy black underneath, implying a flying saucer type shape. And that is indeed what I recall seeing in this Messengers of Destiny documentary. And regardless of what other anomalous UFO video footage was in the documentary, it seemed pretty clear to me that Ron Johnson had convinced me and most of our audience that yes, this was a misidentification on a mass scale. People all across Mexico witnessing simultaneously in multiple days, I think, Venus in the sky and just being convinced it was something anomalous. Well, Ron passed away suddenly in, I believe, I forget exactly what year, but he is now lumped in with a lot of different, quote unquote, suspicious deaths of UFO researchers. And I've included some links: 10 UFO researchers who died of suspicious death, 10 UFO researchers, mysterious deaths and unsolved cases. UAPmurders.com has entries for Ron Johnson, Carla Turner, and Jim Keith, a noted conspiracy researcher who died after he stepped off of a stage at Burning Man and broke or injured his leg. But yeah, Ron Johnson was attending an Anomalies conference here in Austin, Texas, put on by the SSE, Society for Scientific Exploration. And I later learned after his death, well, during one of the lectures at this Anomalies conference, Gerald Ron Johnson made some odd noises and just keeled over dead, most likely of a heart attack. Now, he was a middle-aged man who didn't do drugs. I don't think he even drank coffee, but he was a workaholic and he did work around radio equipment, electromagnetic equipment. But, people do die of heart attacks. Yes, it was odd that it was, during a lecture at an Anomalies conference. And the rumor was that the lecturer had somebody else die during one of his lectures. But what I learned afterwards was that Ron Johnson had been working for Austin's own Hal Puthoff, and an acquaintance who was very conspiratorially minded allegedly asked Hal Puthoff, "What did Ron do for you?" And Hal Puthoff allegedly responded, "Helped me reverse engineer UFOs." Now, why would Hal say that? But yes, apparently Ron Johnson was working for Hal Puthoff. And the night before Ron died at the conference, he had dinner and a long UFO conversation with Hal Puthoff and Jacques Vallée. Jacques was in town, I believe, for the conference. And this is confirmed in Jacques' Forbidden Science journals. I forget which volume, but it would be the one covering the 1990s, probably volume 3 or 4. So, yes, so Ron Johnson gets added to the list. He's also on the free dictionary encyclopedia, UFO Researchers' Mystery Deaths, investigating the mysterious death of MUFON researcher Ron Johnson over at Cyberthetic Project on YouTube. And Carla Turner, Dr. Carla Turner. I think she lived with her family in Arkansas, but she had a connection to Texas via getting one of her degrees at the University of North Texas. And a number of the abductees that she worked with and wrote about in her books were from Texas, and specifically from the Austin and Central Texas area. We, in fact, have some of the collections of one of those abductees. And now Carla did die of quote unquote fast acting. And while I loved Carla dearly, I think she was a phenomenal researcher in many ways. I do think she relied way too heavily on hypnosis and was in some ways not being as careful with that as I think she should have been. But it's really sad that she's no longer here with us. But yes, she too gets lumped into the unusual mystery deaths associated with ufology. Now, Constance Clear I don't believe she was a therapist. I don't believe she was an experiencer, but she worked with abductees and experiencers as a therapist based out of San Antonio, Texas. Her book, Reaching for Reality, talks about the experiences of those she was treating and investigating. Now, towards the end of her life, she had gotten very obsessed. This is circa the year 2000 and 2001. She'd become very focused on chemtrails, the idea that the contrails that people see in the skies, condensation trails, have a nefarious origin and are part of some nefarious activity on the part of the government, the military, or the powers that be. In fact, she was supposed to speak at the National UFO Conference that I was organizing for 2001. I wanted her to speak on alien abductions, but she insisted that she speak on chemtrails. And what was I going to say? No. But she never got that opportunity, of course, because of September 11th, the canceling of that conference. And then eventually she passed away due to a car wreck. She was killed in a motorcycle accident. I knew two people who told me themselves that they were not surprised that she died in a vehicle-related accident because she was a very risk-taking motorcycle driver. And it's, again, sad loss to the community. And now she doesn't tend to get lumped in to the allegations of being on the list, but maybe she will, but who knows? Again, I'm saying all of these I think are not anything nefarious, even though I did entertain the possibility with Ron Johnson for the reason of I later learned was being considered to be the new head of the MUFON, Mutual UFO Network, when Walt Andrus was going to step down. And I thought that would have been a real coup in the sense of here would be a skeptic who, again, I didn't know until afterwards was working for Hal Puthoff, so maybe he wasn't such a skeptic. I don't know. But MUFON at that point was led by Walt Andrus, who was very much a believer and not the most skeptical when it came to things I thought he should be. But anyway, moving right along, just very quickly, I think there are other background notes of interest that you should check out. You know, I see in this current wave of wildest conspiracy mongering, whether it have to do with time traveling assassins and trying to kill the president of the United States, or the idea of off-world colonies that are being run by the secret space program, I highly recommend you watch the Alternative 3 documentary, How a Hoax Documentary Created a Conspiracy Cult by Weird Reads with Emily Louise. Back in 2023, she put together all the videos she'd done on that subject into a massive documentary that I highly recommend. And in the image there, you can see people like Bill Cooper, David Wilcock, Obama, and others. And it all revolves around this infamous hoax documentary put out by the BBC. There's this quote: Jerome Clark comments that many UFO conspiracy theory tales can be traced to a mock documentary Alternative 3 broadcast on British television on June 20th, 1977, but intended for April Fool's Day. And this documentary was subsequently turned into a paperback book, all of which has a crazy lineage. But yeah, it all has to do with this idea of a brain drain of scientists going missing or being murdered, and the idea of a secret program that is trying to keep humanity alive because climate change, climate disaster is going to destroy all life on planet Earth, and the powers that be, all the big countries of the world, the United States, Russia, etc., have secretly banded together and tried to come up with alternatives that will save humanity from decreasing the population, to creating massive underground facilities to protect people from the surface that's going to get uninhabitable, to Alternative 3, which involves taking parts of humanity's best, its most brightest scientists and so forth, off-world to the moon, to Mars, and beyond to start colonies. And it also involves the discovery of an alien life form on Mars and suppression of that information. But it's got all kinds of other wacky elements that really, if you look at them each individually, are all seeded throughout classic UFO mythology and recent resurgences of these different ideas of secret space programs, time travel, secret slave labor on these off-world colonies, and wilder stuff. Meanwhile, you might also recall there's a resonance too within this 2026 flap with the sci-fi story, The Three-Body Problem, which involves a alien species that is coming to Earth and is going to be here years into the future, but which is already influencing us on this planet, and especially targeting our own scientists to disrupt our scientific investigations, to limit our ability to fight back. It's a very complex story. It's a very powerful and an amazing book that's been turned into multiple TV productions, some in Chinese, some in English. You can watch it, the English version, I think, on Netflix, maybe. When I was looking into this, if I've heard about this, I had forgotten, but these headlines, and this one from April 1st, 2024, from BBC News, Three-Body Problem, lawyer sentenced to death for Lin Qi murder. What? Inside the bizarre murder plot surrounding producer of Netflix's Three-Body Problem, Lin Qi, Linqi, 2 words. A Chinese billionaire involved in the new Netflix series Three-Body Problem was fatally poisoned in 2020. Wild. Anyway, of course, then there's outside the UFO community, there's always these death lists. There is in the 9/11 Truth conspiracy community a list of witnesses that have been murdered, allegedly mysterious death of 9/11 witnesses. There's, of course, the classic quote-unquote Clinton body count, a list of people that supposedly the Clintons murdered as part of their rise, political ascension. Of course, that has been touted by both pre-QAnon and QAnon conspiracy theorists. And then, of course, the JFK witness murders. There's a huge number of people that were considered to be murdered as part of the suppression of whatever the truth is about that famous assassination and conspiracy theory. So we've got links to some of those as well. Anyway, all of this is to say, keep an open mind, be skeptical, try to be rational. I'm not saying it's not possible that there's something with all this, but let's not jump to... Okay, well, what else? Let's take another quick break. So, yeah, over at the show notes page for this episode of Anomaly-NOW, this being May 7th, 2026 edition, yeah, there's this ufology family feud. Apparently, the National Capital Area Skeptics, NCAS, recently had former AARO director Sean Kirkpatrick give a lecture titled All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office AARO, a duality in mission regarding UAPs. And yeah, there was somebody else in the audience that apparently has a running feud with Sean Kirkpatrick that I was unaware of. I think I first heard about it on Pavel's Psychoactivo episode number 987. Tim Gallaudet calls out Sean Kirkpatrick to his face in a recent heated exchange. And I saw others like John Greenwald of the Black Vault highlighting it on his Facebook page. And then, of course, you can actually watch the entire lecture on the YouTube page of the National Capital Area Skeptics. But yeah, here is that clip. It's about 2.5 or almost 3 minutes long. This was not the only time Tim Gallaudet, I think, spoke up earlier in the lecture, but this is about, I guess, after the lecture is the Q&A part at about the 1 hour, 26-minute mark.
I want to ask you, and actually I want to ask Admiral Gallaudet also, how you would feel maybe about talking back and forth for maybe 10 minutes or something. Does that sound okay? Or there may be others here that I don't want to keep away from the microphone, but it's sort of a interesting possibility here, and I did want to maybe raise that. I
got about 5 minutes, and then I got to run.
Right.
I'm already late.
Sean, I respect you. We both have decades of government service together and in intelligence and whatnot, DOD. I'm going to ask you point blank and put you on the spot on something. After my 2024 UAP hearing testimony in front of Congress, you had tweeted a response about my statement regarding AARO, where you said, I came and visited AARO and I was bitter because I didn't get a job, and that you believe that was because you didn't hire me because I was prone to conspiracy theories, and that you checked with some of my bosses on that statement. It's well out there. You tweeted it. And ultimately, you know, I didn't go visit Arrow when you were there. It was after you left. I was invited by Mike Waschel, the Navy Intel rep, who asked me to come there, and that's what I spoke about during my hearing. And of course, I didn't look for a job. He invited me, and for me to actually go for a GS-14 job after having been an Undersecretary of Commerce, that was kind of preposterous, I would say. And at the same time, when you said you check with my bosses, I had my bosses formerly were 2 2-stars, 4 4-stars, and a Secretary of Commerce who I've all spoken with, and you never really check with them. So ultimately, your statement there was an outright lie. And I want to ask you what you have to say about that.
I'd say that was not an outright lie because Mike brought you in, you sat in my office, and we had this conversation about
you weren't there.
taking that.
You had left. It was
I had
Tim
not
Phillips.
left. And the position you were looking for was an SES position.
I was not asking for a position. Remember, Mike brought me in. He asked me to come.
Well, then
Tim, let me just ask you, because time is going to be short. Do you want to shed any light on the issue itself? Exactly.
Well, good point. No, ultimately, so it's really clear that you have been executing a disinformation campaign about this. This whole slide captures it. And I know you can't acknowledge it because whoever you're on the payroll with won't allow you to. That's my statement. So,
okay, well, that's a great statement that has absolutely no bearing from reality. So,
yes, sir.
Okay.
Wow. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know either of these men. I know a lot of people dislike Sean Kirkpatrick. I think he definitely has the reputation of being a bit arrogant, to say the least. But yeah, this sounds like such a strange, contradictory situation. And since this, the other former temporary acting head of Arrow, Tim Phillips, has spoken out, and I think Gallaudet said that Tim was in that meeting. So you've got these two Arrow folks, Tim Phillips and Sean Kirkpatrick, with one version of the truth, the story, and Tim Gallaudet, who feels like he's been slandered and is accusing one or both of them of disinformation. Of course, many people think that there is a disinformation campaign and some kind of intel op at the heart of Arrow, the all-domain anomaly resolution office. But who knows? Meanwhile, just to wrap things up, I mentioned ufology abounds. I kind of alluded to this at the beginning of the show, the correspondence dinner shooting, time travel, and Solomon's Temple conspiracy roundup. That's over at racket.news. False flag conspiracy theories swirl around White House Correspondents' Dinner attack. That's over at NBCnews.com. Yeah, it's gotten wacky, folks. I thought there was another one I intended to put in there, but oh well. Yeah, there's all kinds of crazy, wacky time travel elements to some people's interpretation of what happened with the Correspondents' Dinner shooting incident. Some brief follow-up. I know I've reported on the paper about infrasound and its relevance to paranormal experiences. I actually, this is another thing that I talked about with folks at the Austin Archives Bazaar, but I previously reported on the debrief.org's article, Scientists Explore Paranormal Experiences and the Effects of Inaudible, quote-unquote, infrasound, as well as theguardian.com's Spooky Feelings in Old Houses May Be Caused by Boiler Sounds. Study suggests there's also this recent haunted houses and ghosts are probably not caused by infrasound. Actually, now this is over at the Daily Grail. Greg Taylor of Daily Grail wrote this article where he's contradicting this and pointing out that last week news headlines from outlets across the globe announced that a mundane explanation had been found for haunted houses, infrasound, i.e. sounds of a frequency beneath the typical threshold of conscious human hearing, which roughly spans 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. The titles of these articles are convincing. There's those articles. Which is weird because if you read the articles, including quotes from the researchers involved, things seem a whole lot more tentative. Quote, "It's not that infrasound is causing hauntings. I want to be very clear on that," Rodney Schmaltz, co-author of this study, told Ars Technica. Quote, "We're definitely not saying we've solved hauntings, but in some of these older buildings, there could be low rumbling pipes producing infrasound. And if somebody already has the expectation that something spooky might happen, the infrasound might drive that a bit. Greg goes on to say, and it's not just that the titles hype the actual results of the research, quote unquote, infrasound exposure is linked to aversive responding, negative appraisal, and elevated salivary cortisol in humans, unquote, in frontiers in behavioral neuroscience. The results themselves actually offered no evidence that infrasound caused fear or anxiety, the most common emotions we associate with a haunted house. Instead, the emotional responses that appear to have been evoked were annoyance, frustration, and disinterest. That's not to say the results weren't interesting. It's a cool experiment with some fascinating conclusions, and the idea that hidden forces, infrasound, magnetism, electromagnetic radiation, etc., might be affecting our state of mind and perception, while we remain ignorant to many others, is one that I love to read about. And they reference one of their old articles, Daily Grail, from 2008. They reported on the Haunt Project, an attempt to build a haunted room by saturating various parts of it with electromagnetic fields and infrasound to see how research subjects would react to those invisible forces. So yes, thank you, Greg and the Daily Grail, for that. But I also wanted to draw people's attention. I've many times recommended the YouTube channel of Ben Jordan. That's B-E-N-N, 2N, Ben Jordan, Jordan. And a little while ago, he put out this video. This was on February 18th, 2026, Data Centers Behaving Like Acoustic Weapons, reporting on his investigation into the deleterious negative health effects of data centers on nearby residents, particularly as it relates to infrasound, which he has a long-standing fascination with. In fact, he's done one of the better mini documentaries on the mystery hum phenomena, which I highly recommend his YouTube channel. I highly recommend all of his videos about surveillance technology, not related to the anomalous, but also anomalous experiments in audio. To wit, at about the 18-minute mark in this Data Centers Behaving Like Acoustic Weapons video, which is about 30 minutes long, at the 18-minute mark, he has this bit on experimenting on humans. And I'm not sure, but he talks about how he did an experiment whereby, like, I guess these researchers that are talked about in this infrasound, he had people, oh God, enough of that. He basically had people in a room where, if I'm remembering correctly, he had them listen to some music and answer questions about what they thought about it. And then later had them back and explain to them that he'd actually been doing an experiment with infrasound. And he notes the data as it relates to their self-reporting. And it's a small sample size, and he's a very scientific oriented person. So he's not, saying it proves anything. But anyway, I believe some of that research might have contributed to the paper that was being talked about in those other, maybe, I'm not sure. Anyway, check it out or don't. Some other things that we're not going to get to, but there's some cryptozoology headlines, such as marine exploration company to participate in forthcoming Loch Ness search event. Cool. Scotland's real Nessie, Orkney's forgotten sea monster emerges, and the surprising history of the sea monsters that destroyed Alexandria, as well as, I did want to, I don't think I can play this, but over at the YouTube channel of Local 12 is this article, a video digest about the Loveland Frogman could become Ohio's official state cryptid as legend surges in popularity. Woohoo! State cryptids, eh? All right. Well, thank you all for tuning in. This has been Anomaly Now for May 7th, 2026. I'm your host, Miles Lewis, and have a wonderful day. Take care, and we'll see you around. Maybe not weekly. Bye-bye.